And the reason why you need this type of initiative around Ibogaine development is because it is a non-patentable plant molecule that actually fixes most people when you use it the first time. So as opposed to the opioid racket, as I call it, get people hooked on opioids, then the only way off of the street opioids like fentanyl are to take a prescribed opiate like methadone or Suboxone. Suboxone does still have a patent on it, and you have to take it every day for the rest of your life, basically.
This is the way, Green Beret, where warriors talk about the weight they've carried.
Okay, welcome back to another episode of the Awake Green Beret podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Butler, and today we have a very special guest, somebody who I am deeply, deeply appreciative of for coming on, spending some time, especially in the light of current events. I think when we started discussing his coming on the podcast, none of that was in effect. To have him at this time is exceptional, and that is Trevor Millar, and Trevor is the founder and COO of Ambio Life Sciences, an Ibogaine clinic in Tijuana, Mexico, who works extensively with the vets organization and other high-profile participants. We'll say participants. So, Trevor, thank you for being here, man.
Really glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Trevor and I have known each other or been in communication really with each other for probably 4 to 5 years, and have had an ongoing relationship in the plant medicine community, referred people out to him, and he's also been a confidant and an advisor and a friend to me. So yeah, with that, we'll do a quick word from our sponsors, and then I'll turn it over to Trevor for an introduction. First of all, I want to mention the Crazy Tree. I don't know if you can see that, available on Amazon. The Crazy Tree was co-authored by my wife and I. It's a story about embracing your authenticity it's geared towards adolescents. And then there's my memoir, From Green Beret to Shamanism, One Man's Journey to Heal by Matthew Butler. Takes you through my descent into the abyss or the rock bottom, which we're going to come to in a minute, how I climbed my way out of that rock bottom abyss, and my journey with shamanism. And then finally, Olipop. Big fan of Olipop. I can't mention them enough. Keep yourself from the sugars, all the harmful sweeteners, and also plant-based probiotics, good for your gut health, good for serotonin. So thank you to all those sponsors. And now over to you, Trevor, for a bit of an introduction.
I'm stoked about your sponsors, man. You legit work with Olipop?
Oh no, this is manifesting it.
Well, I'll help you. I am a massive fan of that product, man.
Yeah.
I get it all the time.
Yeah. We're trying to court them. We're trying to reach out to them and make it happen, but acting as though it's happening, man. Like I love Olipop. They've saved me from my soda addiction. So yeah.
Nice. I bought a case yesterday at Costco. I had a grape one on the way home. I love that stuff. And I need I need to go on Amazon and order a bunch of those books for our clinics, man. Those would be great to have on the coffee tables.
Yeah, I would love that. I'd appreciate that. And we'll get into this with the program, but what's interesting is I try to speak from a place of experience with the medicines. Iboga and Ibogaine are the two medicines that I primarily have not done. So it would be good for me to get down there and work with you and be able to put it in the second edition.
Please. Yeah. Well, to introduce myself, I'm Trevor Miller. I've been working with Ibogaine professionally since 2012. I was able to legally work with it in Canada, where I'm from, up until 2017. And then Health Canada changed the regulatory status of it, so I haven't been able to work with it there since. But through that work, I was introduced to Amber and Marcus Capone, who started the nonprofit Vets Incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been sending U.S. Special Forces veterans down for this treatment. And they were looking for another Ibogaine provider to work with. So I ended up moving to Tijuana to do that legally. I have two business partners, Jonathan and Jose. And we set up shop down here in July of 2021. We had one house dedicated to detoxing. Ibogaine's very good at getting people off substances. And then we set up a house specifically for veterans. So I think that first year we treated probably 90% veterans, 85% veterans, even with at least 90% of those coming through that nonprofit. And then I did a podcast with Sean Ryan, episode number 30, back in his early days. And that enabled a whole bunch of other people to find us. So that led to our second house providing the 5-day program that we offer to veterans. And now we have 6 houses in Mexico alone. We have one house where we are still dedicated to detox. It can take up to 6 people at a time. We have 4 houses doing this 5-day foundational program, which is great for veterans, first responders, basically people who are not coming off substances specifically, great for traumatic brain injury, depression, anxiety, lack of purpose, lack of meaning. So we open the doors to anyone who feels called to the medicine. And then we also have a house here that's dedicated to our neuroregenerative program, and that is for people with diseases like Parkinson's disease and multiple sclerosis, which Ibogaine has shown very effective at helping those as well. And then we have a new location in Malta as well in Europe, so it can take up
Wow.
to 6 people. It's a beautiful location, physician led. We have 3 physicians who run that program, and yeah, it's been pretty awesome. I'll backtrack maybe a few inches to tell people that might not know about what Iboga and Ibogaine is.
Yeah, that was one of my questions.
Okay, cool. Iboga is a plant, Tabernanthe iboga, it's called, from the jungles of West Africa, countries of like Gabon and Cameroon. And there is a tradition that grew up around the use of this medicine. It's the second layer of root bark that you would use if you consumed this medicine in the jungle, and they've been using it ceremonially for centuries. And then in 1962, a gentleman by the name of Howard Lotsoff in New York City was addicted to heroin, and his chemist buddy knew that he would try anything for fun. And he said, you should try this Ibogaine stuff. Nobody actually knows where he had it, where he got it, but he got it, pulled it out of his freezer, said, you should give this a go. And he was open to new experiences, and he tried it, went on this incredible 24-hour journey, but came out the other end and he realized, wait a second, I haven't wanted heroin the whole time I've been on this, nor do I want it now. So that's when its anti-addictive properties were discovered. And Howard was a real champion for the medicine, started knocking on doors, trying to get people to pay attention to what he had effectively discovered. It kind of established some standards of care, and a bunch of underground clinics opened up from there. And Marcus Capone, who started that veterans nonprofit, he was retired from the Navy SEALs and really didn't feel as though he had PTSD, but something was not right. And he was prone to anger. He was drinking too much. His wife figured she'd be losing him fairly soon to taking his own life. As a last-ditch effort, they took the advice of a friend and he went to Mexico and tried Ibogaine, and it was incredibly effective for him. And Amber says that when he walked back in the house afterwards, she knew immediately that she had her husband back. So they set up the nonprofit that has been sending U.S. Special Forces veterans down for this treatment. And then we were the site of a study with Stanford University where 30 Special Forces veterans, they needed a traumatic brain injury to get into the study. They went to Stanford prior to coming to Ambio. Then they came to Ambio, went immediately back to Stanford, and the pre-brain scans were clearly showing traumatic brain injury, post-brain scans showing it was largely reversed, if not entirely reversed in a lot of those guys. So we figure that's what was wrong with Marcus. Like I say, he really enjoyed his career, didn't feel like he suffered a lot of moral injury or regrets about serving, but something wasn't right, and he was a breacher. You know,
Mm, of
on
course.
breaching while you're actually downrange, but training to breach. You just get hit with subconcussive blasts 100 times a day sometimes.
Hmm.
And yeah, so Ibogaine's working really well to help veterans overcome a lot of what ails veterans.
Yeah, I love that. And I really love you putting that into context. I think that it's something that is really sort of missing from the conversation with veteran mental health. Like I think that, like to me at least, there's these three components. There's like there's circumstantial, I mean, three components for, like let's say wellness or, um, you know, peace of mind, mental health. It's, there can be circumstantial, there can be the chemical, and then to me there's the mechanical, and I think that that's really a big part of the conversation that's missing is we can get circumstances right, you can get maybe the chemical right, which is part of this, but then if you're still mechanically not able to have that process manifest in the in the brain where it should, you're still stuck.
Yeah. And it's remarkable that, we've stumbled upon something that actually works. Otherwise, it's a post-mortem examination to say, yeah, this person had CTE kind of thing. And I think Ibogaine, while it has yet to be proven scientifically, I would put a lot of money on the fact that I think Ibogaine is reversing CTE before it turns into worst case scenario.
Yeah, beautiful. Let's stick a pin in that and come back to that. There's a lot I want to ask around that, but let's talk about the rock bottom. What was there a rock
Yeah.
bottom for you, or is there a metaphor you wanted to share?
Yeah. I think there were a few, for me personally, a few, rock bottom for one person is different from rock bottom for another person. I think in the days when I used to drink and party too hard, and when my wife did the same next to me, my now ex-wife, we're still good friends, but yeah, there were some dark moments there, and Ibogaine did, without me really wanting it to, help me stop drinking. Like, I had no intent to stop drinking at all going into a journey almost 10 years ago now, but Ibogaine made it super clear that it would be a great idea for me to stop drinking, and thankfully I took its advice. But I used to work with a colleague I started the Psychedelic Association of Canada with, and we did a webinar, you can probably find it on YouTube still. She had this saying that there is a rocket ship at rock bottom, and it seems to be a really accurate thing from what I've seen. I've met so many people, countless people who are at their rock bottom or were at their rock bottom prior to Ibogaine. And while they were there, they tried, this last ditch effort. I gotta go someplace and try this crazy psychedelic drug. And they find that that is the catalyst they needed to completely change their lives entirely, to find that rocket ship that turns their life into the thing they'd always hoped it would be. So
Like
there's a
that.
rocket ship at rock bottom is my metaphor when I meet somebody at rock bottom.
I love that. I might borrow that. So yeah, I love
Please
that a
do.
lot. Let's take us back to the beginning. How did a Canadian stumble upon a psychedelic from West Africa and wind up in Mexico?
Yeah. So it was actually, I find it slightly ironic now that I work with so many veterans, but one of the biggest catalysts was 9/11. And I was in my early 20s when 9/11 happened, and I was very disappointed with the state of the world. And another thing that goes hand in hand with what happened is I realized a couple of months after 9/11 that the media was driving me crazy. Used to be, it was kind of pre-internet news, but I used to sit down in front of at least 3 newspapers a day, get righteously pissed off at the state of the world. I would wake up every morning, turn on the CTV news network in Canada, hear the news pumping while I got ready, got pissed off at the state of the world. But that was really brought to a head after 9/11. Months after 9/11, something just dawned on me. I'm like, oh my God, this news is driving me crazy. And then thankfully I did something about it. I decided to go on a media fast, and I just
Mm.
entirely cut myself off from the mainstream news. I'll give you, a bit of insight around that is people would think if you try and cut yourself off from news, well, then you're not informed, then you won't know what's going on. You still know every single thing that's going on. It still
Yeah.
makes it into you. There's no way you can avoid that, especially
Pervasive.
now. But I realized that the news had turned me into a passive yet obsessive observer of everything that was wrong in the world. So while I went on this media fast, I also decided to try and make the world a better place. And I turned my attention to Vancouver's downtown east side. The downtown east side is known as the poorest postal code in Canada. There's abject poverty. There's a high rate of drug use. It's kind of like Skid Row in a kind of a 6-block radius. And I was always fascinated with that part of Vancouver from the first time I saw it. I moved there in around this time, my early 20s, and just decided to try and do what I could to try and help that neighborhood. And I knew I had no skills to offer, but I figured maybe that was a benefit. Maybe I'd see some fresh way of looking at the problem. And it turns out ultimately that was kind of true. But it turned into about an 8-year networking and research project, made a lot of contacts, thought about it endlessly about what I might do to help that neighborhood. And then in 2009, Ibogaine came on my radar, and I had been exposed to psychedelics as recreational drugs at a relatively young age, and there was a shop in Vancouver called the Urban Shaman, which sold a bunch of entheogenic plant medicines and had a cool community around it. And then again, in the early 2000s, 2003 or so, was the first time I'd heard about Iboga and Ibogaine, but I never really put two and two together that it might be helpful to help this neighborhood until I was speaking with a woman who started an organization in the downtown east side, and she graciously was giving up her time because I was still seeking, and said, I'm looking for a way to help out. And we sat down for about 3 hours, and we couldn't really think of a way for me to help out, except for the whole time I was speaking to her, there was a binder on the wall behind her that said Ibogaine on it. And just near the end of that conversation, I said, what about Ibogaine? And she says, actually, I have a lot of people calling me for that. There was a former Ibogaine clinic in Vancouver that had shut down, but it still had a website up. And it said, we're closed, but if you're looking for further information, I might be able to help you. So people were calling her all the time. And I said, well, let me follow that thread. And she goes, great, I'll forward these phone calls to you. So I found a source of Iboga online. I took it myself. I gave it to a couple of people. I saw quickly I didn't know what I was doing. Thankfully, I didn't hurt anybody. And so for a couple of years, the phone would ring and I would tell them they should go find a provider in Mexico. Then in 2012, I was invited to an Ibogaine Providers Conference that was ran by Jonathan Dickinson, my current business partner. But at that conference, I met my former business partner, and he had apprenticed with people in Mexico, knew what he was doing with the medicine, really wanted to set up shop in Canada where it was still legal to work with. And I said, well, my phone's still ringing. We'll see who calls next. The phone rang. It was a 28-year-old and 32-year-old brothers, and the 28-year-old's girlfriend. They're the boy's father, the men's father, were calling on behalf of them. And Gareth and I treated them over the course of a couple of weekends. It went really well. We said, there's obviously a need for this in Vancouver. Let's set up shop. So we found a house just outside of Vancouver, dedicated it to treating people one person at a time, 7-day protocols we started with. But, it's said that when you find the right path, all the right doors will open. So they really did. Dr. Gabor Mate is a famous Canadian doctor, trauma, psychedelics related. We met him. He found us a physician who was licensed still. He was retired, who would work with us. She would prescribe anything that we needed. I had a buddy who was a veteran RN nurse. He is not a veteran, but he had been an RN nurse for a long time, or an ER nurse, pardon me, an RN from an ER for a long time. And he started working with us. And yeah, we just started treating one person at a time through this 3-bedroom townhome. Over the course of a couple of years, we treated about 150 people. Then we graduated, or pardon me, about 75 people. Then we graduated to a bigger facility, treating 3 people at a time. That went well. And then in 2017, Health Canada changed the regulatory status of Ibogaine. It was listed as a natural health product for a while there, which was just this unique window of time where, because it was misclassified as a natural health product, natural health products should not be potentially dangerous, and Ibogaine is. They recognized their mistake and they instead put Ibogaine on the prescription drug list, which is a good place for it, but because it hasn't gone through clinical trials, it's not available as a prescription. So it was effectively illegal for me to work with Ibogaine in Canada from 2017 on. And for 4 years there, I worked with some nonprofits. I volunteered for nonprofits. MAPS Canada, the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies, has a Canadian branch.
Mm,
I was the chair of the board for them for a few years. I helped start the Canadian Psychedelic Association. And then that call from Amber and Marcus Capone came through, and I started doing what I could to find a place to operate legally. And that's what brought me to TJ.
wow. Wow. What a journey. And thank you for sharing that. And also thank you for doing it. Like that's, um, I really appreciated what you said about when you find your path, the doors open. And it sounds like that was really, truly what happened here. It sounds very miraculous.
Yeah, I give all credit to God. Ultimately, it was a lot of praying, knowing that I know I can be useful. Please show me how I can be useful. And I played the long game on that prayer, and eventually the answers came.
Beautiful. Help our audience. I'm fairly familiar with, but I assume that there's others out there who don't. I think there's a lot of people who hear the words Iboga and Ibogaine and use them interchangeably, which is not accurate. Can you elaborate on that as a
For
subject
sure.
matter expert?
For sure. I think I use them interchangeably, but the ultimately, Iboga is the plant, Tabernanthe iboga. And it is the second layer of root bark, as I said, that is used ceremonially in Africa. So it's a wood, basically. To consume that, you're consuming the most acrid wood you can imagine, sawdust, wet sawdust, trying to get it in you. And then you can take that and you can refine it one time using a mild acidic solution like vinegar, and you're left with a brown powder that is called the Iboga total alkaloid, or T. And then you can refine that one more time, and you're left with a white powder, which is the Ibogaine alkaloid itself. So Iboga has a dozen. I've recently heard that some scientists have been plucking even more alkaloids out of the Iboga plant, but it's got a dozen or upwards of 50 or 60 different alkaloids in the Iboga plant itself. And the TA, the total alkaloid, and the root bark contain them all. And then the strongest alkaloid we know of is ibogaine, and that's the white powder, the ibogaine HCl, it's called, because you would use a hydrochloric acid solution to pull out that last stage. So I look at it as, I look at it as similar to sugar cane versus brown sugar versus white sugar. It's
That's a good
just further
analogy.
refining, pulls out further sweetness and gets rid of the pulp kind of thing. But then there are sustainability issues with Iboga itself. Since it's become popular in the West, there's been a lot of poaching of this plant, and it takes 7 years to grow to a point where you could harvest root bark from it. So it's just a pretty slow growing cycle to get to harvest. So there is another plant, or there's a handful of other plants actually, that have molecules similar to ibogaine, plants that are in the same family. The most widely used one is called Voa africana, and it has an alkaloid called voacangine. And using a relatively simple, I'm told, for a chemist, chemical process, you can turn it into pure ibogaine without the sustainability issues.
Wow.
So that is actually what most of the clinics around the world use, is ibogaine from a different plant source.
Interesting. Okay, that's really helpful to know. Did not have never heard that before. Is there, as you're familiar with, let's say the family of DMT, we can talk about 5-MeO DMT, and then there being a synthetic version of 5-MeO DMT. Is there something like that that's even available or on the horizon, or is it just a full Xarin?
Ibogaine has been purely synthesized. It is a very expensive process. It makes no sense to do it,
Okay,
basically. So I
yeah.
think for a long time to come, it'll come from the Iboga plant, because there's an organization called Blessings of the Forest in Gabon that has done a lot around Iboga conservation.
Hmm.
And there have been farms planted through some of their work. So there are sustainable sources of Iboga itself now. And that's one of the big conversations right now, that now that there's been this executive order, is working with the country of Gabon in a way that honors and respects them and the indigenous heritage of this medicine, so that there is profit and information sharing that goes back to Gabon itself. So the very first export license ever out of Gabon for Iboga has been granted, and it was actually granted to my business partner, Jonathan Dickinson, through his company Terranosis, which took that Iboga, turned it into a purified total alkaloid, so an extra fancy total alkaloid. That purification was done in a lab in Vancouver. And we actually used that for about 20 patients, I think, a number of years ago. And he's in the midst of doing that again with the next round of wood that came out. He just needed to find another lab to work with.
Beautiful. Can you walk us through maybe some of the similarities and differences between an Iboga journey and an Ibogaine journey?
There's really, I just did a video on this because it comes up. It's really, you would have to be a very sophisticated Iboga or Ibogaine eater to tell the difference between the two from the get-go. They are almost exactly the same experientially. There is a slight difference, but for one, if you were to consume the wood, you need to consume the wood. It comes with a lot of pulp, so you might be a little bit more prone to purging when you take something like that. I once treated a guy in Vancouver who heard that taking the total alkaloid might be more spiritual because of all those other alkaloids that are in there. And he really wanted to take Iboga total alkaloid. And it was a low dose protocol we were using at the time to wean him off of opiates over the course of a number of days. And spiritual does not necessarily mean easier.
Yeah.
So he had a super challenging time on the TA that day and asked for Ibogaine the next day. But bottom line is, I've done them all. Their signature is the same. Like when you have any of those three in you, you know you have taken an Iboga product. And I don't think I could tell the difference in a blind taste test, because I would be able to tell the difference between the root bark because I'd have to take more of it. But total alkaloid to Ibogaine, even taking total alkaloid one time compared to total alkaloid the next time can feel different. So total alkaloid versus Ibogaine the next time, it's going to feel different as well. They show up in different ways every time that you take them. Like I say, the same signature is there. You've taken the same medicine, but I would advise to the average consumer that's looking for an experience or looking for healing that it really doesn't matter. What you're looking for is a sustainable source. Making sure that you're taking a medicine from a sustainable source, I would say, is the most important part. Unless you're years down the road, a few Ibogaine journeys under your belt, and you want to try something else, then, for shits and giggles, go for it, basically. And then at the same time, I recognize that one thing that is different from total alkaloid, and again, it's not a hard and fast rule, but a general rule of thumb would be total alkaloid lasts longer. It takes a bit longer to kick in, and it lasts longer. And it's not like the psychoactive effects last longer. It's more like the recovery period
The
lasts
post,
longer.
yeah.
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 And those other alkaloids surely do something. They're probably hitting something. There must be on a level that you can't really put your finger on experientially. I would probably bargain that there's some kind of an entourage effect with those other alkaloids in there. Ultimately, though, the Ibogaine, if you're looking for healing and you want it done, Ibogaine is the way to go. It's relatively easy to access, even though this medicine's hard to access overall. But you can find providers who are going to have Ibogaine, and then you could go maybe you want a more Bwiti type experience, like in the ceremonial way that might happen in Africa.
Mhm, mhm.
For that, you could go to Africa and get an actual Bwiti experience. Or there are a number of people who have been trained by the Bwiti in Africa. And they, over here in North America, might provide a more Bwiti type experience. I don't think any of those people would have the gall to say it's an actual Bwiti experience, because I think you really do need to be in the
Bleedy.
jungles of Africa to make that happen and surrounded by that community, because the whole community gets involved when you get initiated. So, the setting that you take the medicine in, you can mix that up for sure. We like to honor the Bwiti through some music that we play from the outset of the journey. There is a mirror that is used in our treatments. That's a nod to the Bwiti tradition. But we don't have the gall to say that we're Bwiti at all. From what I understand, Jonathan has a very solid relationship with Gabon and elders from there. And from what he hears, they don't mind us using Ibogaine at all. They're excited that Ibogaine is seeing the light of day. They don't want anybody to try and be Bwiti, though. So
Mhm.
they're okay with Ibogaine being used. Just don't try and rip off the culture
Yeah.
entirely.
Cultural respect versus cultural appropriation.
Yeah.
Now, have you ever done the Bwiti style in Gabon?
Not in Gabon. I have not been initiated. It's still on the bucket list, reluctantly on the bucket list. I know it's just going to be a huge thing when I do. There's a chance I go this year. I have done ceremonies with Mark Howard. He runs Iboga Soul. They do ceremonies mostly in Mexico now, but he's based in British Columbia. And I have done ceremonies with him in kind of the westernized version of a Bwiti ceremony.
Does this hold a potential for? I mean, I think I heard you speak to it in terms of, is it wrong to use the word reparations, or but in a way that some of that resources are returning to the people of Gabon? Is this turning into an industry for them, for their own well-being and stability and such?
Yeah, they would be open to that. So Gabon has signed on to Nagoya, which is a UN treaty to try and prevent biopiracy and make sure that all the good stuff we've been talking about, like reciprocity, like information sharing, like profit sharing, does go back to the country. So the United States did not sign the Nagoya Treaty. That's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next little while. How do they find the balance? Brian Hubbard from Americans for Ibogaine has a relationship with Gabon, and I know the man. I like the man. I know he's trying to do his best around making sure that the tradition is honored. And yeah, he may or may not think that Nagoya is the best way to do that, but I think ultimately the cool thing about Nagoya is a lot of thought has been already put into it. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. It kind of covers all the bases. I heard just recently that the government in Gabon has kind of doubled down on Nagoya and is ultimately saying, this is the way we want to do this. So
Nice.
as long as that continues to happen, I think the proper moves shall be made. And then if the proper moves are not made, there's, threat of potential lawsuits in international courts for not honoring that treaty.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. Yeah, you brought up Americans for Ibogaine and Brian Hubbard. Can you walk us through, I guess maybe your history or your relationship with that and your experience, and maybe also elaborate on how your world changed approximately, what, 2, 3 weeks ago when President Trump signed the executive order and placed pretty much a very prominent spotlight on Ibogaine.
Yeah, it's so a bunch of states got together and sued companies like Johnson and Johnson and Purdue Pharma for their role in the opioid crisis. And they won, and they won a lot of money, probably not enough money. I think those pharma companies still made a profit off of that opioid crisis, but money was allocated to each state in the lawsuit to deal with the opioid crisis. So Brian Hubbard worked for the state of Kentucky, and he was tapped to be in charge of the opioid abatement money and the committee that was set up around that. He said, I will do this, but you have to allow me to try and find innovative new treatments as well.
Hmm.
And through that, he stumbled upon Ibogaine and became a big champion for it. And then, long story short, Kentucky didn't like the idea, fired him. Some particular politicians in Kentucky got elected, shut down the project, and Brian kept going with it. He had made some good contacts, including former Texas Governor Rick Perry. And Rick Perry was a fan of Ibogaine because he saw what it did to help veterans. Most importantly, the lone survivor, Marcus Luttrell, saw Marcus, who had lived with him for a couple of years while he was trying to get better. He saw nothing help until he went to Mexico and took Ibogaine. So they then started to do the same thing in Texas to try and get Texas to use states' money towards Ibogaine clinical trials to get it available as a prescription. They were successful in Texas. They got $50 million allocated initially. And from that, Americans for Ibogaine was set up. A 501c3 nonprofit was set up to continue to marshal this cause. And then they have been successful in helping a number of other states pass bills to use public money towards developing Ibogaine. And this may sound like a socialist initiative, and it kind of is. And the reason why you need this type of initiative around Ibogaine development is because it is a non-patentable plant molecule that actually fixes most people when you use it the first time. So as opposed to the opioid racket, as I call it, get people hooked on opioids, then the only way off of the street opioids like fentanyl are to take a prescribed opiate like methadone or Suboxone. Suboxone does still have a patent on it, and you have to take it every day for the rest of your life, basically. The crazy thing about Suboxone is that's not how it was developed. Suboxone was developed as a fast taper. It was effective for a fast taper. You could start with 8 milligrams, cut it down pretty quickly to 6 to 4. But then if you were to really do that, you would take a 2 milligram dose and the next one would be 1 milligram. Then you would do half a milligram. Then you do a quarter of a milligram. But they don't do that anymore. They just stop at the 2 milligram dose and keep people on forever because, hey, profit,
Wow.
So that money machine, as opposed to a plant molecule that you can't patent,
Hmm.
and you only take it once, and you don't have to have somebody taking an opiate for the rest of their lives. So the cards are really stacked against the traditional big pharma picking up Ibogaine and developing it. And big pharma has had 30 years to pick up Ibogaine and try and develop it, but nobody has. So this Americans for Ibogaine initiative has been dedicated towards getting states to chip in money for the good of the citizens to finally get this developed as a prescription and make it widely available. So I know I spoke in Mississippi at the Capitol there. That was surreal, speaking in a big Capitol building like that about a psychedelic plant medicine, this
In
very
the
obscure psychedelic
in the
plant
deep
medicine I've been
South,
working.
yeah.
Yeah, the deep South. But they've put 5 million towards it. Arizona's put 5 million towards it. I think Oklahoma's pretty close if they haven't. There's a bunch of other states I'm forgetting that have committed. So Americans for Ibogaine then will, to the best of their ability, kind of quarterback this initiative. So each of those states is going to have its own clinical trial, but let's not step on toes. Let's make sure that we're doing the studies efficiently and not doubling up on stuff that we don't have to double up on. That's essentially where Americans for Ibogaine is at. And Brian Hubbard and Rick Perry have appeared on Joe Rogan a couple of times. If anyone's interested in this topic, those are really great episodes to check out.
We'll
And
put the
Brian
links.
Hubbard is a man to behold.
Yeah.
He's got this Kentucky drawl, this hillbilly accent, but he is one of the most eloquent people you will ever hear in your life.
Yeah. Yeah. I enjoy listening to him speak because like you said, like at first brush, you're kind of caught with that hillbilly nature, but the more you listen to him speak, and especially I think I would classify it as his passion. Like that man speaks with a passion of, well, probably something he's very similar or very familiar with in his upbringing, which would be that of an evangelical preacher. Like
Yeah.
he brings the passion to the conversation.
Yeah. He has definitely brought the winds into the sails of this issue. So much so that on the last Joe Rogan episode, they mentioned in the episode that, it basically came up, and I think we all know it, that Joe Rogan knows President Trump. And Joe, I just heard him recently say that he has never asked the president for anything, but he shot him a text with a bunch of information about Ibogaine. And the president said, "Do you want FDA approval? Let's do it." So he started putting the wheels in motion around that. And, we know the president can sometimes be hyperbolic, let's say.
Sure.
So, even the president cannot immediately just get something FDA approval. But what the executive order says that was signed is it's dedicating $50 million in federal money towards Ibogaine research. And it is clearing the pathway for a bunch of different psychedelic therapies to get approval quicker. Some of those therapies like psilocybin and MDMA have already been given FDA breakthrough therapy status, but it's even going to do more to get those through. And then there's also something in the EO that if any of those drugs are Schedule 1, and I think they're all Schedule 1, that as soon as the clinical trial is done, they're going to reschedule the drug so that as soon as it actually does get complete FDA approval, then it will immediately be available to the people as much as logistics can make it happen. But yeah, it was a wild day. That was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now.
Yeah, I think so.
I was in San Diego staying at a buddy's house, and I was having a nice day off, frankly, and didn't turn on my phone until about 10 a.m. that day. And my phone just blew up. And I was able to, whatever time it was, I was able to tune in. And, it's definitely not every day that you wake up seeing 6 dudes that you know really well standing behind the president in the Oval Office, because Marcus Luttrell was there. Marcus Luttrell has become one of my greatest friends. I visit him in Texas all the time and stay with his family. His brother Morgan was there. I've spent Thanksgiving with him a couple years ago. Rob O'Neill was there. We've treated him 3 times. He's featured on the MBO website. Marcus Capone was there. We're brothers. We're family now. Henry Berkowitz was another guy in there. So pretty crazy.
Yeah, and
Pretty crazy.
Brian Hubbard was there.
Pardon?
Brian
Brian Hubbard, of course. That's the 6th. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Like you used the word surreal earlier in the conversation. And like to me, I was in ceremony that weekend doing a men's retreat, and you know, it was early in the morning and gone out to just kind of check some messages because I hadn't checked messages in about 24 hours. And I turned on my phone and same thing, like all these people asking me if I'd seen the news. Not obviously not nearly as connected or correlated as you were in that specific Ibogaine sort of spotlight, but just you know, the surrealism of the fact that to me, it does feel that we are on a precipice of sorts, maybe seeing, you know, like real significant traction in this psychedelic arena.
Yeah, it's been amazing. Thanks, honey. Uh, delicious. Cheers. That classic grape flavor
I'm
with
telling you.
only 5 grams of sugar.
Mm-hmm. And no artificial sweeteners and plant-based. You know, this is it. We're manifesting it. I got chills right now. Olipop was going to be on board soon.
Come on, Olipop. We love you, Olipop. I like the root beer a lot too.
Oh, the cream soda is my favorite.
I even like the cream soda, and I don't regularly like cream soda.
I tell you,
Yeah.
I would fight a man over the last cream soda.
So, yeah, for me, who has been professionally involved in the psychedelic space since 2012, to see the momentum behind the movement, it's been astounding. And, you know, as board chair and member of another nonprofit dedicated to psychedelics, you know, there's been uphill battles around getting people to pay proper attention to this. And Ibogaine in particular, like even when I was on those boards of directors, it's like, you know, I'm working on behalf of mushrooms, basically, is what it felt like, because
Mhm.
that's kind of lower hanging fruit. Still nobody was really interested in Ibogaine. I think especially, and perhaps it's a sad social commentary, but when Ibogaine was only good to treat addicts, we have a hard time getting the people to take care of, to
Mhm.
kind of give a crap about addicts, sadly. But
True.
now that veterans are involved, it's been remarkable to see. So to go from Ibogaine really being the dark horse of the psychedelic realm, me and all my friends have always known it's the coolest of them all. But
Mhm.
to see Ibogaine now being spoken of by President Trump in the Oval Office, it's been wild. One of the one of the biggest memes that has come up in my life personally since 2016 is me telling people about Ibogaine and they saying, "Oh, we really got to get some in President Trump." And I'm like, "Yeah, right. Never going to happen." But then to have, and I still would put my money on never going to happen. At the same time, to have him sign the EO and say, maybe I need some. God, I couldn't believe it, man. Like, we are very powerful manifestors as the plant medicine community, because I never would have saw that coming.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So, cheers to manifesting. You know, and here's another part of this. Like here's chapter 2. You know, you and I don't think we've had a conversation around this, but I've been fairly actively involved in the advocacy space here in Utah. And we got our first psychedelic bill passed this year after several years of working on it. It was HB 390 signed into law. I was fortunate enough to be in one of those sort of Oval Office moment, standing behind the governor, not the president. But that one authorized a study on veterans and psychedelics. It was geared towards 5-MeO DMT, and we're looking now at maybe, I don't know, altering that. But as a follow up, and this is the interesting thing with the federal level, is we also then met with Senator Curtis, our U.S. Senator, to see if he would be interested in sponsoring a bill that essentially says once FDA approved, then it would require TRICARE and the VA to pay for these treatments for both active duty and retired.
Oh, that's huge. in the Mormon state.
Exactly. It's a very interesting dynamic, but it also goes to show not only, I guess, the power of, like say President Trump drawing attention to it, but also, you know, while it's also a very heavily LDS Mormon state, it's also a very patriotic state. And one of the unique characteristics, sadly, with Utah is that the an interesting coincidence is that we know 22 veterans a day take their life, but it's also mathematically works out to 22 per 100,000 is the national average. In Utah, it's 71 per 100,000. Yeah, so we have as that Rust Belt, which includes Kentucky and Brian Hubbard and all that, where the opioid crisis hit, we have a mental health crisis in Utah that hits particularly hard on veteran populations. So I think that was both what fueled the HB 390 and the interest in this other federal bill. But yeah, it's the patriotism runs deep here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm a Christian, and I have for years, and I'm sure it'll go until I die, run into people who are worried that this is against their faith. And the sad thing for me is it's people who have been praying desperately for healing for decades sometimes. This gets brought to them. I would say it's of God. And they're like, no, that's, my Bible says no. For one, I think if you really dug into what the Bible says about medicines like this, it doesn't really say anything very specific about
Mhm.
an exact medicine like this. I think there's some leaps in interpretation that need to be made before you can say the Bible is saying anything against anything like this. But for me, I'm the kind of Christian I am is the kind that follows the teachings of Jesus in particular. And maybe a red letter Bible Christian, those Bibles where every word Jesus speaks is in red. I think that's the meat of the religion for me. And I always like to point people to the Sermon on the Mount he says when he's talking about how to know the truth and avoid false prophets, he says, by their fruits shall ye know them. And that's basically saying that if it produces a nourishing fruit, it's a nourishing thing. If it produces a poison fruit, it's a poison thing. And he also warns about wolves in sheep's clothing.
Mhm.
And I think the perfect example of a wolf in sheep's clothing is the modern day pharmaceutical commercial,
Yeah.
where people are dancing through fields, finally happy, supposedly dancing in the streets, holding hands.
Making
And
pottery.
yeah, it wraps up with a monotone voice quickly saying, you might be more prone to suicide, and a whole bunch of other horrific side effects that could happen. So that's just a classic wolf in sheep's clothing. It's
Yeah.
dancing around like a sheep, but it's got teeth like a wolf coming out the back end there. Whereas this plant medicine I work with and all the plant medicines I know of when used ceremonially or within a therapeutic context, they actually produce lasting healing for most people. They actually lift depression. They actually lift anxiety. The drinker doesn't drink anymore. The drug user doesn't use drugs anymore. The traumatic brain injuries seem to be getting reversed. The list just goes on and on. People find purpose again. People find meaning again. And more than that, people find a connection to God like they've never had before.
Could
I
not
have
bel
treated
yeah.
far more than one atheist who one guy said this, the first guy that said it to me literally. He said, Trevor, I didn't believe in God when I walked in here. Now I know there's a God.
Yeah.
And I've we mostly treat Christian conservatives.
Mhm.
And almost to the person, I think if you could poll them, they would say that it's brought them closer to Jesus. So I think that's really important for Christians to know.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I agree that, to me, you used the word the entheogens or entheogenic. I don't know if you're referring to an organization earlier in the conversation. Oh, I think there was an entheogenic supplier in Vancouver that you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And just for the audience that maybe if this is the first time you're hearing this show, we talk about the word entheogen quite a bit, which is Latin for the sacred plants. And I was one of those people. Like speaking of Latter-day Saint or Mormon, I was raised Mormon. I had left the church and I was in ultimately my agnostic phase before discovering plant medicine. And now I'm one of those who is a true believer in the divine, in God, in something greater for sure, because of the sacred plants. I wanted to share, like you shared your metaphor of like rock bottom and the rocket ship. I'll share one for you about the people who are praying. There's probably, again, probably, hundreds of thousands of parents out there praying for some sort of solution for their addicted child or addicted spouse or whatever it may be. My father, I want to give a shout out to my father. When you get my book, you'll read about, how he intervened in my life by calling the police on me and having me arrested. And so I have the deepest and most tremendous amount of respect and love for that man. He made a hard call that day. And so he used to tell me this story as a kid, and I'm going to share it with you and return the metaphor. He said there was this man that was up working on his roof, and he lost his footing and he began sliding off the roof. And so quickly he prayed, dear God, help me. I'll do anything if you'll just save me. And just then his belt snagged on a nail. And he said, never mind, God, I got it figured out.
Exactly.
Iboga and the plant medicines is that nail that's,
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard one similar to that where a man stuck on his roof, a flood comes, he's praying to God for help. A boat comes by. He said, no, I'm waiting for God to help. Next helicopter comes by. No, I'm waiting for God to help, and doesn't take what's brought to him. Another great one is a man, his whole life, all he wants to do is win the lottery. And he prays, God, please let me win the lottery, please. And this is his number one prayer through decades. And then he finally dies. He comes to the pearly gates and he's like, come on, all I wanted was the lottery. Why couldn't I get that? And God replies, well, you had to buy a ticket.
Yeah, precisely. Let's shift back a little more back on topic. I was curious if you could elaborate for us a little bit more about the medical risks. I think, like you said, for those that have tried them all, Ibogaine seems to be the one that I think you called it, the best or the greatest, the funnest. But it's also, I think, kind of well known as also maybe one of the more risky. Can you talk to us about some of the medical risks, and then also does that transfer between both Iboga and Ibogaine?
Yeah. For one, before I get in trouble one day down the line when somebody watches this and I get accused of being an Ibogaine elitist or something, I am a huge fan of all the substances and they all have their place.
Yeah.
I was on a panel for a Toronto Ibogaine or a Toronto psychedelic conference a number of years ago. And one of the women on a panel was a shaman from Nicaragua, and she seemed super legit. And she was speaking to the audience about the different medicines, and she called the mushrooms Los Niños, the little children, and they're kind of playful and easy sometimes, but not
Sometimes.
dangerous. And she said, she spoke of ayahuasca as the grandmother, and of course, that's a super common way to refer to that medicine. And then she spoke of cactus like peyote and San Pedro as the grandfather. And she was kind of finished, and I looked down the line and I said, well, what about Iboga? And she goes, it's the master. Like, okay. Somebody else's words on that.
El
But it
Maestro.
is potentially dangerous. It has a cardiotoxicity issue. It prolongs the QT interval of the heart rate, and the QT interval on an EKG is basically the space between the upper and lower chambers firing of your heart in between heartbeats. And many medications prolong the QT interval. And that's basically what we're looking out for in the EKGs and the heart monitoring. is, for one, you need to come off any QT prolonging medications before you come in. And because what we don't want is an already prolonged QT and then to put Ibogaine on top of that can
Sure.
get into the danger zone. But that's really easily screened out for. It's we have, I think, 15 doctors on staff now, 40 nurses and or paramedics. And we know exactly what to look for the cardiotoxicity issue. I think a bigger issue around the detox is drug interactions. And there are just so many contaminants in the street drug supply now that that's the thing we're most on our toes for, is fentanyl users in particular. We've recently extended our fentanyl program. People have to stay at least 21 days. It might be up to 31. And, we have like a 28 panel urinalysis we can give. We've bought a bunch of extras to put on top of that, but there's just new crap being thrown in and tainting this drug supply that more than the cardiac issue needs to be of concern if you're going to do this on your own, which I don't recommend at all because of that reason. But moreover, what we're actually on our toes for in the clinic is drug interactions.
Wow, thank you. I really appreciate that insight because I've known, that there is significant risks involved. I hadn't really understood the nature of them, so I appreciate that. I also appreciate what you said about the shaman on the panel with you. I like to refer to again the ethnogen family as a Swiss Army knife.
Yeah.
It's like one's really great for opening a bottle, one's really great for filing a tool, another one might be really good for, carving and cutting and things like that, where they all it's not always a linear space. It's not like the Scoville factor on peppers where, something's at 10,000 and something's at 100,000 per se. It's more about, and I think that there's some value in maybe seeing them in different applications like the El Ninos. Like maybe somebody needs like sometimes we'll do a ceremony where we, a term I'm sure you're familiar with, where we give somebody a handshake dose or
Yeah.
a handshake experience. For those that are listening that may not know, that means to give, like a lot of my demographic, I'm sure is a lot like your demographic, where I'm working with middle-aged males who may have been in the military for 2 or 3 decades and have never experienced any sort of psychedelic. And so a handshake dose has been particularly helpful in introducing them just to the journey overall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, I'm a big fan of Ibogaine. It's also a huge commitment. It's minimum 5 days with us. It's not cheap. And there are lower hanging fruit. Like to do a therapeutic dose of mushrooms is 6 hours. If you grow them, they're free.
Yeah.
If you know where to find them in the forest, they're free. Even if you're not a mycologist, it's relatively easy to find. And I have seen a therapeutic dose of mushrooms. And when I say therapeutic, I'm generally referring to putting an eye shade on, putting headphones on, going deep into yourself for the entire 6-hour journey. The Johns Hopkins psilocybin playlist is my favorite.
Mhm.
And I've seen it tackle alcoholism. I've seen it tackle cocaine addiction in one dose. I've seen it help people overcome obsessive compulsive disorder in one dose. And that's a 6-hour thing. And I'm very liberal in my recommendations around something like this. And you can take this with a grain of salt, but I really feel like it's the kind of thing that anybody can do with a trusted loved one at home. I think the more container you can set up around something like taking mushrooms, the better, the more intention you can throw in. And they're literally the safest drug imaginable. David Nutt,
Mhm.
Imperial College. Alcohol is the most dangerous, mushrooms the least
The least, yep.
dangerous. So,
We'll drop a
while
link to that. We'll drop a link to that down there
yeah,
as
cool.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
For
But
people.
I I had no idea of the therapeutic potential of psychedelics when I first started taking them. So the first time I took mushrooms was probably around a campfire with a dozen beers in me at the same time, and we all turned out all right. So the more safety and consideration you can put around it, the better. And I don't think people should be afraid
Yeah.
to step into the realm if they feel called.
I agree. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the, your emphasis on like the container for those out there. We often refer to set and setting, set being the dose, setting being, have you thought through, like you said, eye shades, playlist, who knows who's there, who's with you. Are you, do you have 6 uninterrupted hours, all those different things. So again, folks, please pay attention to your set and setting. Next quick question for you. Ibogaine obviously has gotten so much attention. Again, we talked about that with the Americans for Ibogaine and the opioid crisis. It's so particularly in the Swiss Army knife model, so well equipped to interrupting the opioid withdrawal patterns. Is that the same with Iboga as well, or is that particular to Ibogaine?
No, it would work with Iboga as well.
Okay, interesting.
It again just comes down to a safety consideration. If you're detoxing off of opiates, maybe you don't want to be consuming a dozen tablespoons of root bark. Like a couple little capsules might be easier on the system overall. But yeah, I used to detox people using total alkaloid in Canada. I would generally mix it up a little bit. I'd have a bit of Ibogaine, a bit of total alkaloid. But for detoxes now, I would just stick to straight Ibogaine.
Beautiful.
It's a lot easier to dose as well. Even total alkaloid from one batch to the other, they have different strengths. It's normally not as strong as Ibogaine, so you give kind of twice as much total alkaloid as you would Ibogaine. So there's just bringing in a few different factors, but we used to throw in a little TA on top for whatever it would bring into the equation as well.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that measured like in kilogram, like grams to kilograms type of thing?
Yeah, it would be the dosage is based on milligrams per kilogram of body weight. So a detox dose with Ibogaine might start at about 15 milligrams per kilogram. So you're getting into like a gram, 1.2 grams per detox dose. But then it's just far more complicated because the withdrawals might return a little bit in a day or so. So you might go in with booster doses. Before you go in with booster doses, you want to do another EKG. You want to see how much that first dose is still affecting the QT interval. So definitely not something to try at home. It's,
So,
man, we've learned a lot over the years, that's for sure.
yeah. Okay, 2 more quick questions, and then we'll turn it over to you for closing thoughts too. The first one is, are there any myths or rumors or even, information that's being applied incorrectly about Ibogaine that kind of get under your skin that you wish to clear up?
Sure. The 80 to 90% success rate for Ibogaine for detoxing people off opioids is incorrect if it doesn't have the proper context. That stat is coming from a study that was done, and it was talking about on site people while they were still on site, they felt detox from their system by that percentage. And I would say we have an even better percentage than that while people are on site. By the time we send people home after an opioid detox, they're not feeling withdrawals. The cravings have mostly been eliminated. I'd say it's closer to 95 to 100% success rate while they are on site. But then people go home and they've got decisions to make. And, you know, and who knows how well they prepared for aftercare,
An
and who knows
environment.
what kind of temptations they're going to put in front of themselves.
Yeah.
So I would say overall, anecdotally, Ibogaine detoxing people from opioids is anywhere from kind of a 40 to 60% success rate. I think you can put measures in place that can get you a higher success rate than that. Like if you're just real, for sure you're ready to quit, you got rid of all the other temptations in your life, you didn't leave the baggie in the drawer at home kind of thing. I think it can be much higher than that anecdotal stat. But I think it's important to also note that even if it's a 30% success rate, even if it's a 20% success rate, it blows traditional addiction treatment stats out of the water at that.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it is actually more than that. But even if it was only 10 or 20%, it's still doing better than a lot of the classic addiction treatments. The other, I always found it funny. There was some article in Forbes. You could probably look it up. 3 myths about Ibogaine or something. It was actually a friend of mine who wrote it, but she didn't speak to me, sadly. And she quoted a doctor from another Ibogaine clinic. And one of the myths, what the myth he said was that Ibogaine is a hallucinogenic. And I get where he's coming from. I would say Ibogaine is more of a visionary plant medicine. It's showing you the truth more than showing you hallucinations. And I see that's where his intent was. But I have seen Ibogaine cause some of the most realistic hallucinations in people. It becomes comical. Like people just absolutely convinced something happened that did not happen.
Hmm.
I once had a guy, I walked into the treatment house the night after the treatment, and the guy's sitting on one of the stairs in our living room area there. And he's like, "Well, what are you gonna do now?" And I'm like, "Well, what do you mean?" He's like, "Well, the cops came and they're like, what are you guys gonna do?" And he's like, "What are you talking about, man?" He's like, "Well, Jimmy jumped out the window last night." Jimmy didn't jump. He's like, "Yeah, man, the cops came. Like, you guys are gonna have to shut down now, or what's going on?" I'm like, "No, man, he's upstairs. He's fine. He's completely fine." And he didn't believe me until I was able to produce the other guy, Jimmy. But I've seen another one. It's a very rare occurrence, but I'd say, there's a 2% of people who experience these radically realistic experiences that just simply didn't happen. So
Yeah.
I would call those hallucinations. I think that's kind of a funny myth about Ibogaine. It can cause the most realistic hallucinations of any drug I've ever heard of, really.
Yeah, yeah. Which that kind of segues into my final question. There's I guess a sentiment out there about, or maybe it's just the conversation. That's what I'm searching for. There's a conversation out there about the life review that Iboga or Ibogaine provides. Can you speak to that a little?
That's a great one. Yeah, that's another myth for sure. The myth is that everybody who takes Ibogaine goes through some kind of a full life review that makes everything better somehow. There are some people who might actually get a full life review. I can't think of a single person who has told me they got an entire life review, but I'm not saying it's impossible. I would say what it can do is it can take you back to specific events that might have a certain sting to them, allow you to see it from maybe a third party position and realize, oh, I know why mom did that to me. She was having a bad day. Actually, she was having a bad year. And all of a sudden it takes that sting away, puts it in a new context, and you can forgive this situation and move on you hadn't before. That's super common with Ibogaine. That's super common with ayahuasca. That's super common with mushrooms. Like those things can happen. I think it's important to say, I think another myth is that everybody's going to get tremendous visions on Ibogaine or Iboga. That doesn't happen for everybody. I am not a visual tripper, for example. I definitely get insights. I get clues. I feel as though maybe there is a something that is delivering a message to me sometimes. But even if somebody doesn't get that or the visions, Ibogaine still works for people. You don't need visions for Ibogaine to work for you.
Yeah.
I almost feel like the visions are sometimes just a distraction while the medicine is there doing some really important work in the background. But some people do get fantastic visions. Sometimes the visions are just sheer chaos coming at you, different faces, different colors, different rooms, just weird random stuff. Other people get crystal clear visions that make total sense. One of those that's coming to me is I've heard a few people who wanted to end their own lives getting taken through the consequences if they did do that. One guy in particular saw himself sitting behind his back shed in the place he was planning on doing it. He saw his wife and his child discover the body, and then was taken through the horrors that they would have to go through, including 10 years down the road when his child is still miserable and
Mhm.
depressed and considering doing that to themselves. So that kind of thing I've heard of multiple times. There's certain themes that come up again and again. I call one aspect of it the Iboga minions, which is this army of whatever it is coming to heal, to repair the brain, like the dozers on Fraggle Rock, or like the minions from the show Despicable Me, or like little Pac-Mans that go and clean up the system. That's a common theme. Weird game shows that people go through, that they have to keep going through it until they get the answer right. They'll get a green light if they get it right, or hear a buzzer and a red light if they get it wrong. That kind of thing comes up. So there are common themes if people are getting visions. And sometimes people get crystal clear visions and they don't make any sense whatsoever. That's very common as well. Auditory hallucinations are super common. You might hear things, might sound as though a whole bunch of new people entered the room. You might hear other people in the room talking, but when you look, nobody's saying anything. That's very, very common as well.
Interesting.
But I think that's a myth to be quashed, is this whole life review, for sure, because people come in expecting something like that, and it's not very common at all.
Yeah, I agree. I appreciate that. That's actually something I call it, the expectation management. I think it's important for all journeyers before a psychedelic experience to sort of check your expectations at the door and just allow the medicine to give you what the medicine's going to give you.
Yeah. Yeah. Keep your intent. Try and keep an eye on why you're there, but let go of all expectations, because you're going to be wrong.
Yeah, perfect. Well, one final word from our sponsors. Again, Larabelle and the Crazy Tree by Sue Inglet and Matthew Butler. It's a book about being authentic, even if it's crazy, being yourself. And then finally, From Green Beret to Shamanism, One Man's Journey to Hill, which, by the way, was told to me to write while on a 7-gram journey. So
Beautiful.
yeah. There's that. And
Olipop.
Olipop. Yep.
This delicious, a new kind of soda.
New kind of soda. Yep.
Get it at your local Whole Foods or Costco.
Exactly. Drink to that. Cheers. And I'll turn it over to you for your final comments before I.
Yeah, whenever I'm given this opportunity, I like to share my view on what faith is versus fear. Fear, for all of us, is just an expectation, but it's an expectation of a bad thing to come. Whereas faith is the exact same thing. It's the same mechanism at play, but it is an expectation of a good thing to come. And we tend to get what we aim for. Therefore, do what you can to embody an attitude of faith and move in that direction.
Perfect. I love it. I appreciate it. And, I have so much like sincere gratitude to you and for spending some time. 100. I didn't mention that, but 100% of the proceeds, my bad, but 100% of the proceeds of this book go to Donor Connect, which is the organ donor nonprofit who, when our son passed, that facilitated that, and 100% of the proceeds of this book also go um, to getting veterans into ceremony. So your appearance here today helped us save lives, and it's been an honor. It's been a privilege. I'll come see you. Maybe we'll go to gabone together someday and try it
That
the
sounds like a
traditional way.
plan.
So
Awesome.
thank you so much. Sincere
Thank you, Matthew.
appreciation and gratitude. Love you, brother.